In this update, we've got Tropical Storm Ophelia has officially made landfall early this morning. Then we have a significant severe weather threat breaking out later on today across the northern and central plains. So let's take a look at Ophelia because that made landfall as a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm early this morning right around the Emerald Isle region, bringing some high winds and some heavier rains. It actually dropped down to an 881 millibar low pressure. And I thought the National Hurricane Center was actually going to be upgrading this last night to actually a hurricane, but they decided to kind of hold off. But nonetheless, not much difference between a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm and a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane. You still got high winds, tropical storm force winds, and very heavy rain are going to be extending through the Carolinas all the way up the East Coast for really several days to come. And then all eyes will be turning towards the central and northern plains. We've got a powerful shortwave coming across, taking advantage of the much more active subtropical jet. And then we have another area of low pressure across our northern branch. Those are going to be joining together along a cool front is going to be kicking off a significant severe weather threat later on this afternoon. And man, we've got plenty of heat, folks. This is the first official day of fall, and it's not going to be feeling like it any stretch of the imagination. Down further south, Texas just can't get a break from this relentless heat that's been impacting this area all summer long, and it continues in fall because we've got temperatures soaring to the triple digits later on this afternoon. We've got heat advisories in place, and all that heat is going to be fueling these thunderstorms, later on today. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of the month, and you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's get into this because we've been talking about Ophelia for several days now. In fact, before it even originated, that stalled frontal boundary down into off the coast of Florida, we talked about Jacksonville potentially could be a landfall, and that's exactly where it actually made landfall early this morning. And you can see it had some 71 mile per hour. In fact, Cape Lookout actually confirmed wind gust when it made landfall of 73 miles an hour. So those winds extend into Jacksonville this morning into 51 miles an hour, to Greenville around 46. We've got tropical storm force wind gust all the way up into the DC region, and that will continue up the coast. So these winds will obviously die down as this continues to move further inland. But it's going to be bringing some very heavy rain, multi-inch rains across these regions. And some of these areas could actually pick up 4, 5, 6 inches of rainfall down here into the Carolinas. But here's the main setup this afternoon. We're going to be watching this pulse of energy coming in off the southern jet stream here. And then we got a northern branch too with this low pressure setting up shop across the Dakotas. And just to the right of there, that's where all the upward lift is going to be. And we should be seeing numerous, supercell thunderstorms break out across later on this afternoon into the evening time frame. And these will be starting to back build on the southern flank of it too. And so we could be looking at a pretty significant severe weather threat. You've got several areas of low pressure. You've got obviously with Ophelia, you got the southern shortwave down here into portions of Texas and Oklahoma. And then you got that northern branch, the much more significant low pressure draped across the Dakotas through Minnesota. And that actually gets into Iowa and fishtails down into Kansas. As well as we have a pretty good cold front coming in across the Pacific Northwest, and they got some chillier rains for them, and it stays really chilly for almost a week across this region, while the rest of the country is going to be dealing with plenty of heat. So, and that heat is going to be the culprit of fueling these thunderstorms. So later on this afternoon, if you're looking at the overall water vapor imagery, whenever it looks like this, kind of looks like a shrimp, that is not a good sign, folks. That is a powerful low pressure center getting its act together and then taking advantage of all that heat that's going to be relentless pulling in from that southwest winds, the higher dew points. All this energy is going to be fueling these thunderstorms and we could be looking at a pretty significant severe weather threat. Definitely concerning, because we've looked at some of these kind of the updraft potential across these regions, and these are pretty high numbers, folks. So across Nebraska, across portions of Minnesota here through Iowa, and then there's that southern branch too, likely getting into later on tonight and then heading into tomorrow timeframe across Oklahoma and northeast Texas could also get hit hard with some very high winds, some larger hail. So we could be looking at some big time hail producers. And unfortunately, some tornadic spin ups as well. I mean, if we look at some of the tornado parameters, they're looking at pretty high numbers as well. So, I mean, not like off the chart, but still, this is a formidable event. I think it's the biggest event we've seen so far this fall. And yeah, this is a widespread event across Minnesota, across Iowa, through portions of Missouri into Kansas. This will eventually extend all the way into northeastern portions of Oklahoma, and eventually head even further south, and eventually actually headed into northeast Texas as we go into later on tonight and into the day tomorrow. So here's your overall tornado, risk factors, and right now we've got a 5% probability. So these whole areas across the northern and southern branch, from Minneapolis to Sioux Falls to Des Moines, back into Omaha, into the Kansas City region, all the way down into the Tulsa region, extending into the Oklahoma City region, into Springfield. Those areas are the highest areas of possibly seeing a spin up tornado within these line of embedded supercell thunderstorms that likely will be breaking out right after about 4 or 5 o'clock, and only really intensify as we get deeper into the evening time frame. So definitely be on high alert for tornadic spin-ups within these supercells, and some of those could be some pretty significant hail producers as well. This is a large area of a hatched risk. Whenever you see something like that, basically it implies around 2 inches or potentially greater in this area, from Kansas City into the Tulsa region, into the Oklahoma City region. I won't be surprised to hear some tennis ball, maybe even some baseball size hail coming out of this region later on tonight, as all this really gets its act together. So as when those temperatures soar later on this afternoon, that will be the culprit. And you got that southwest winds too, pulling in all that moisture. So as we go into tomorrow, that just continues, right? So that cold front continues to push a little bit further south. Now the severe threat will be setting up shop across areas into southern portions of Oklahoma, into North Texas, getting into the San Angelo region, back here into West Texas, into the Midland region. Not as significant, but still could be looking at some pretty significant hail producers out of these, and definitely some higher winds. I don't really think it's a tornadic setup. We could be looking at northeast Texas. Some of these areas a little bit concerning, because this could be especially into southeastern Oklahoma and northeastern Texas. I would not be surprised this area actually gets upgraded to an enhanced risk as we get into closer to that event. But it's got some heavier rain. So on the big picture, here's the path of Ophelia. So we had that stalled frontal boundary that was off the coast of Florida, off the southeast coast, and that was a non-tropical low we talked about, and it turned subtropical. Then it ended up taking on tropical characteristics. And then last night, wow, the satellite imagery looked very impressive. I was really surprised the National Hurricane Center did not upgrade this to a hurricane, because either way, they could have went either way. They decided not to do it and kept it as a strong tropical storm. But the impacts were the same, with some high winds going inland, and then now just a heavier rain is is going to be extending up the eastern seaboard, and that will extend all the way into the Boston region. So we've got multiple inches of rain, and then we've got our severe threat. So we've got slight risk all the way up to moderate risk of heavy rains really into the Tulsa region, those areas into eastern Oklahoma, under actually a flood watches. Those are heat advisories. Yeah, heat advisories down there in Texas with those triple digit temperatures. And then we got some high winds with that other low pressure coming in off the west coast. So it's a pretty significant day. And we've got winter weather advisories up there in Montana. So it's starting to snow. So We talked about that cold air, so it's not hot everywhere. It's definitely cold on the really chilly side across the further out west you get, especially into the Pacific Northwest. So here's the setup on the winds. So that definitely some high winds going to be associated not only with Ophelia, but with these two areas of low pressure across the middle of the country, the northern branch and the southern branch. So some of these areas could easily top 65, 75 mile per hour winds along this boundary within Minnesota, getting down into Iowa. And then there's that secondary pulse of energy across the Tulsa region and into eastern portions of Oklahoma. And I think, yes, I think it probably likely will get upgraded with definitely some high winds pulling into northeast Texas, those areas into Paris, into the Texarkana region. Those areas will likely be seeing some 65, possibly some hurricane force wind gust. That will be during that Sunday type of event, as you get closer. But look at the heavier rain, folks. I mean, Ophelia's bringing 2 to 4, some 6 to 6 inch isolated spots within this zone from North Carolina into Virginia, back into the DC region, into Delaware, back into portions of Connecticut, into Massachusetts, into the Rhode Island region. So these areas are all going to be picking up possibly at least 1 to 3, and there's going to be some isolated reports of 2 to 4, and then even some more isolated reports of possibly 6 inches, especially closer into the Carolinas. And then you have the northern branch. You've got that upper level low draped across the Dakotas through Minnesota, and then you got that second pulse of energy, and this is where they have those flood watches. And because it slows down, it really starts to slow the further south you get. So that's why very heavy rain, if not flooding rains, is more of a concern within the Tulsa region and eastern portions of Oklahoma. And then that actually extends into northeast Texas. I think North Texas is kind of like on the borderline. I think if you live east of the I-35 corridor, you're likely going to be getting some of that heavier rains and then lighter amounts out west. So here's the setup transferring into that Sunday event. So as the cold front continues to push further south, we do have that slight risk. So the heavier rains push even further south into the Dallas region, going back into Waco, into Tyler region. That extends into the Texarkana region again. And then even pulling further south as this gets, as the cold air, it's a cool front. I wouldn't say cold front, it's a cool front, but it's going to kick off some much needed rain. And that just continues into Monday. So as we transfer into Monday, look at areas that could see a marginal risk for some heavier rain into the San Angelo region, into Del Rio, back into Victoria, into the San Antonio and Austin region, into Houston, Huntsville. These are areas that are desperately needed for rain, folks. Yes, San Antonio, I'm talking about you. So you finally cool down a little bit and get some rain back in the picture for you guys. So definitely enjoy it while it lasts, because there's not much rain for the next 7 days after this one. But you do get some cooler conditions. So you got all the high temperatures today. That likely extends into tomorrow, but once we head into Monday and Tuesday, these areas are going to be feeling really nice, more like fall-like temperatures, back into the 80s, taking advantage of that cool front. You got really chillier conditions still inundating portions of the Mid-Atlantic and the New England regions. And then, of course, that low pressure out west brings in all the cooler air, and those are high temperatures, folks, into the 50s for a good part of the Pacific Northwest. But the one thing about next week, after we get past Monday, it looks to really die down on the severe weather front. So it's a pretty bumpy ride for those next 2 days. Pretty active, especially today. But as we go into Monday, it'll kind of wind down with that marginal risk. And then once that subsides, I think it really is quiet for at least a couple of days. We'll have to watch, because these temperatures go back up again. And these areas across the Great Lakes really start to crank up the thermometer. And that could spell trouble again with more severe weather by the time we head into Friday, potentially Saturday. But look at the temperature anomalies as we going into October, folks. I mean, Yes, enjoy the little bit of a cool down because it's quick. I mean, you got a rapid, once that moves out, southwest winds pull back in, and you've got 5, 10, and once you get into the Great Plains here, you've got 20 degrees above average, and it's completely the opposite off the west coast. So there's going to be a sharp gradient in temperatures, 15 to 20 degrees below average out west. And then once you hit the central and eastern 2/3 region, especially across the Great Lakes into the upper Midwest, it's going to be feeling every bit like endless summer just will not let up. Because here's the breakdown over the next 7 days on the precipitation front. So you've got that area of low pressure going to be pulling in from the Pacific Northwest. Those are chilly rains pretty much all week long across these regions into the Seattle region, into Portland, into Northern California, lighter amounts as you extend further inland. And then you've got that other piece of energy where they do have that slight risk, even moderate risk down here into eastern Oklahoma, lighter amounts as you get into Texas, but still welcome rains. They'll take anything they get. And then there's all the rains that are going to be complementing from what Ophelia will bring with those multiple inches of rain for the next 2 to 3 days. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. I do like this video, and definitely check out my winter forecast after this video and catch the next update where I protect you before and after the storm.